If you're a content creator, or an editor for one, this is almost the perfect storage device for you. Screw portable hard drives that lose your data, or that you lose outright. This thing brings redundancy, and therefore security, while being fast enough to edit straight from, and it doesn't exactly break the bank. This is the UGREEN DXP4800 Plus, and it's so damn close to being perfect. Let's take a look at this thing and I'll explain what's good and bad about it. Let's start with a tour and the specs. This is a 4-bay NAS with each bay labelled nicely up on the front. It's not too much larger than the 4 drives themselves would be stacked vertically, with only an inch or so of lift on the bottom for the motherboard, and maybe 2 inches or so extra on the back for the built-in fan and magnetic dust filter. On the front you've got the power button and status LEDs, along with a USB-C 10GB port, USB-A 10GB ports, and an SD card reader. As for the rear I/O, that offers 10GB Ethernet, 2.5GB Ethernet, 2 USB 2 ports, 1 5GB USB 3 port, and an HDMI port, plus DC in. The external power supply is rated for up to 150 watts, although that is really the worst case scenario. Actual energy usage is a lot lower, like they claim 18 watts of average, up to like 45 watts of peak writing. There is also a secret compartment on the bottom, which frankly is what takes this thing to the next level. Under here is not only 2 upgradable RAM slots, but 2 Gen 4x4 M.2 slots. Yeah, this has 2 SSD slots alongside the 4 hard drive bays. Sweet. Installing drives in the sleds is also ridiculously easy. UGREEN did provide me with 2 4TB Seagate Ironwolf drives, and they literally just clip in. You press the tab on the bottom to pull the sled apart, you drop the drive in with the ports facing out the back of the sled, and then squeeze the sled back together, and that's it. You slide the sled back in, and hey presto, you've got the drive installed. You can even lock it with the little included keys if you fancy. You have 4 bays, but at a minimum you'll want to install 2 drives for redundancy. All 4 is better though, as you can run in RAID 5 mode, which uses only 1 of the 4 drives for redundancy. As for the SSD slots, those just slot in with a single screw in the back, like usual. UGREEN does include some ludicrously thick, actually slightly too thick, thermal pads to keep the drives relatively cool under use, and then you just stick the panel back on. The first chink in the armor though is definitely the RAM. The included stick is just 8GB of DDR5 SODIMM memory, which just isn't enough, especially with those SSD slots. While this thing doesn't run ZFS, at least by default, which is an absolute RAM hog, if you want to use this thing for anything other than just really fast network storage, things like Plex, Nextcloud, Home Assistant, or Pi-hole, this might struggle. While this is very easy to upgrade, at any time no less, it is frustrating that they don't just charge a couple quid more and give you at least 16GB. The NAS supports up to 64GB total, or 2 32GB DIMMs, which is plenty. At least the CPU isn't quite as sort of basement spec as the N100 you usually find in all of these sorts of NASes. This is an Intel Pentium Gold 8505, a 5-core, that's 1 performance, 4 efficiency cores, and it's a 12th gen Alder Lake chip. It's a 15-watt base, 55-watt peak chip that, with a usable iGPU that means that you can use this as a media center too if you fancy, and obviously plenty of PCIe lanes. Clearly UGREEN have opted to give you 8 of the 20 available lanes for the SSDs, but some have clearly gone to the networking too, which I'm fine with. It's also worth noting that this NAS itself has 128GB of built-in storage for the operating system. And speaking of the operating system, let's have a look at it. As usual, it's a web UI with a fully handheld setup procedure. It's pretty easy, guiding you through creating your volume and your first shared folder, although it is worth noting a couple of things. First, the SMB service isn't enabled by default. That's what lets you connect the NAS to the NAS from your PCs, so you need to enable that. You'll also want to leave the NAS alone once you create that volume, as it has to synchronize the array, which depending on how big your drives are, can take anywhere from hours to days. You can attach the SSDs as a cache immediately though, but if you want to use this as a proper read-write cache, you apparently need both drives installed for some reason. If you only have one drive installed like I have, it's set to read-only or a read cache. The UI should be pretty familiar to anyone who's used a pre-built before. It's basically emulating a virtual desktop with movable windows for files, settings, and apps. There is an app store, although it's shockingly light on apps. There are just 27 in total here compared to the hundreds you'll find in, say, the QNAP or ASUS app stores, or the thousands on Unraid. There is sort of a reason for that though, as one of the supposed selling points of this NAS is that one of the apps you can install is Docker. For those that don't know, Docker is basically the backbone of the entire internet, and all of those other app stores as well. Docker is basically lets you run each program, think Plex, Jellyfin, or Home Assistant, in its own little virtual machine, but less heavy than actual full virtual machines. Docker's image repository basically acts as its own app store, with basically every program you can think of being available, although it is mostly skewed to web development tools like Jenkins, MySQL, and Nginx, or Nginx, depending on how you read it. UGREEN's Docker app does make sort of searching for those images pretty easy, although the actual container creation is pretty rough. You need a lot of technical knowledge to make this work, and the crossover between someone who buys a pre-built NAS and someone who is very comfortable creating Docker containers from scratch isn't what I would call a single circle Venn diagram. Most NAS providers spruce this bit up at least a little bit. Some, like QNAP or ASUS, put a bit of effort into making this just a one-click process, while others, like Unraid, more clearly label or pre-fill what the sort of different variables are meant to do so that you at least have some idea. Like, what does the PS1 environment variable do in this transmission container? Unraid would at least tell me. That does mean that while this is technically capable of running anything you want, you will need to know how to run the Docker containers and maintain them, which isn't something I would expect many people would want to do. For me though, the biggest selling point of this thing by far is the networking plus the SSD cache. Offering both 10 and 2.5 gig Ethernet makes this thing a content creator's dream. I edit from my overkill Unraid NAS over 10 gig Ethernet, and I use a single SSD as a recent read-write cache. It works flawlessly and means that once I ingest my footage, it's all safe on my NAS and admittedly backed up to a second offsite NAS, mind you, and like this can do just that. Considering this thing is just £509, maybe add a few quid more for an extra stick of RAM, that's an absolute steal for this much power and connectivity. Like, a 10 gig PCIe card is at minimum 60 quid right now, but a decent one is £100 or £200, so to have that just built in here is incredible. Plus, the 4 bays and the 2 SSDs gives you plenty of storage and reliability and speed, and if you really want to, you can just install TrueNAS on this thing instead by plugging in a keyboard and a display, and then hitting Ctrl and F12 to enter the BIOS on boot, disable the watchdog, and install any operating system you want. I love a machine you can truly own. While there is plenty more to this, for me, I'm kind of already sold. Between the hardware being both top-notch for the price, the UGOS being pretty decent if a little lacking, and the ability to use any OS you want, sans UGREEN support anyway, this seems like a great shout. This feels like a great balance of price and performance. Sure, you will want to order at least a second 8GB DDR5 SODIMM module along with the NAS and some drives, but to have 10GB networking, SSDs for caching, and a well-built and powerful NAS all for £500? Well, I can't really argue with that. I should also add that this thing is practically silent. Sure, once you're doing some writing, the hard drives might make a little bit of noise, but this has been on the whole time, and I can't hear it, and the mic definitely can't. You can hear the road outside more than you can hear this thing. So again, I'm really quite impressed. Of course, those are my thoughts, but I'd love to hear yours in the comments down below. What do you think of the DXP4800 Plus? Is this a NAS for you? Also, if it is, what sort of use case would you have for it? Obviously, I think of content creation because the networking plus the SSD caching makes this great for just working straight off of, but if you have any other uses or just home use, let me know in the comments down below. I will leave a link to this in the description if you are interested. If you want to check out more videos like this one, you can hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell notification icon, and you can check out plenty of other videos on the end cards, including my own NAS builds for my own personal and off-site backup uses. Otherwise, that is kind of it. If you want to check out my own hardware, the open source response time and latency testing tools, head to osrtt.com, linked in the description. That was, yeah. Thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you all in the next video.